Ken?
Mile wide, right?
Yeah. Okay, so we are going to be looking at the art of the Southwest. Really, there's not a lot of art. What we're going to be talking mostly about is architecture, civilizations, cultures of the Southwest. Again, going up to about 1300 AD. So we're not going to be talking about a couple of the more prominent peoples, prominent tribes. We're not going to be talking... I just totally lost the names of the two of them. We're not going to be talking so much about the Apache and the Navajo. Those tribes came about a little bit later. We're going to be talking more about some of the earlier ones. There are a ton of distinct Native American tribes that we're looking at in this area. And when we're talking about the American Southwest, what we're really talking about is southern Colorado, southern Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and then into the northern part of what is modern-day Mexico. Right? So basically all of the Sonoran Desert plus a little bit more north. That's what we're mostly focusing on today. Obviously, there are tons of other tribes, tons of other peoples throughout the rest of the Americas. We're not really going to be focusing too much on them. But you can kind of get an idea of how these cultures exist because the cultures in the Southwest are going to be broadly, again, I'm painting with very broad brushes here, but are going to be broadly similar compared to the ones that we're talking about today. There is a pretty distinct difference between the Mesoamerican cultures and the cultures of the indigenous people of North America, which we'll get to here in a second.
Do they look different also?
A bit, but not very much.
Go to the museum that house all the Native Americans.
Hey, look.
Mm-hmm.
Down Phoenix. Field trip.
Alright, Mr. Did you
Field trip.
video this?
Yes.
This is you videoing it?
Mm-hmm.
He's flying the helicopter.
Yes, that was me flying it. So when did it all start? There were tribes populating the Southwest about 7,000 BC. From about 7,000 BC. There's not a lot of artifacts dating way back then. What we really see is what we call these ancestral Pueblo tribes. So we're talking about the Anasazi, the Mogollon, and the Hohokam are going to make up what we call the ancestral Pueblo peoples. Why do we call them Pueblo? Well, it's a Spanish word meaning house. They built houses, right? So when the Spanish came and they saw this, they called them Pueblos. So that's where we get the term. Obviously, that's not what they themselves called themselves. But there's going to be these three tribes that we're going to be really looking at with some detail. So the Mogollon, the Hohokam, and the Puebloans. In fact, the Hohokam, that wasn't even their name. We don't know what they themselves called themselves. The Hohokam were, we're going to get into that a little bit later, but that was a name given to them by later Native American peoples. We just don't know. We don't know what their term was. Yeah.
Do all of the Native American tribes, especially the ones like in like Arizona, Utah, like around there, they all believed in those what are they called? Like those spirit things. I mean, they all believed in spirits, but
Yeah.
were they more so than the ones in the Midwest?
It was different. Slightly different. We don't see a lot of records of religious practices until actually a little bit later on. There must have been some. We just don't see any evidence of it. We're not going to see any evidence of it until about 1200 or 1300 AD.
Yeah, because I know that the ones here and stuff, the tribes here believe these witches that could transform these big wolves.
Yeah.
I think they're called
What this sounds really dumb, but the Brother Bear, is that Native American?
Yeah.
Those people?
Uh-huh. Yeah, so that's more like Plains Indians.
Ah.
Okay. Just a side note, when we're talking about these peoples, when we're talking about indigenous peoples, different people, so if you're talking to various people of that ethnicity, of that descent, they will prefer to be called different things, which we will respect. So most Native Americans that I know prefer to be called Native Americans. Some of them prefer to be called indigenous. We're really referring to the same thing. Up in Canada, they prefer to be called First Peoples. Okay, cool. My sister-in-law, Evan's aunt, so she married Mrs. Latham's brother. So Mrs. Latham's brother married a Native American. She's, what is she? What is her tribe? Lakota Sioux. Okay, so she's in South Dakota. She refers to herself as Indian. And I was like, this is a couple years ago, I was like, all right, I'm just going to ask. Thought you wanted to be called Native American. Ignorant white guy here saying, what do I call you people? And she was like, yeah, I'm an Indian. That's what she said. So she likes to be called an Indian. Whatever, fine. Some other people who, if you call them an Indian, they'll be like, I'm a Native American. Okay, fine. So it's a little bit of a minefield for us white people. But, you know, again, we just treat it with respect. We treat them with respect, and we go from there.
People that live in India, like, we don't,
Right.
do we call them Indian?
We do, yeah. And so that's why most Native Americans don't like to be called Indians, because that was kind of a pejorative term. Like Columbus thought they were Indians, like actually from India Indians, and so he started calling them Indians. And that's why they're like, no, some white guy from Italy is calling us an Indian. We're Native Americans, which I understand, right? But again, it just depends. So I'm going to be referring to people who are indigenous. I'm going to be referring to people who are Native American. It's just kind of whatever comes to my head first. You know, whatever. If you're ever speaking to someone who is of that descent, just ask. How would you like to be referred, right? That's not woke. That's not liberal. That's not bad. That's showing respect, right? In the same way as if someone is calling you a Christian all the time, you're like, hey, I'm Catholic, not Christian. Same thing, right? Okay, so a lot of these tribes really died out around 1300 AD. This is why we're stopping this survey right around 1300 AD, probably due to crop failures. European settlers in the 1500s, when they arrived in this area, did see some people who were descended from these peoples, from these Puebloan peoples. But there wasn't nearly the settlements. There wasn't really the tribes that there were back then. Okay, so who are these people? Again, several groups collectively referred to as the Pueblo. We're looking at the Anasazi, right? These are called ancestral Pueblos. The first thing we're going to look at, though, is looking at agriculture. If you're living in the Southwest, how do you survive, right? It's difficult enough for us with all of our modern engineering and our canals and our irrigation to garden, right? Gardening is hard, and that's with turning on a faucet. Imagine trying to do it without that. This is an ancient canal. This is actually just north of Phoenix. This is an ancient canal that was dug by the Hohokam people. And so they were very, very adept at irrigation, and they were able to do that. So they were able to take water from rivers that were flowing more than they are today. So the climate was different back in the early periods that we're looking at. The climate was a little bit different. It was a little more wet. It wasn't as arid, and so they had more water to be able to pull from. Yeah.
Why? I guess this is an answer to the question I asked. But why is it that like rivers what's the big one here?
Colorado.
I guess the Colorado River are just empty. Or just
We use it.
um,
So like the Salt River that we drive over near, like we cross the bridge on 7th Street, that's all dry. We've diverted it. We've used it. It's all diverted into canals. And we'll look at that actually in a little bit. Okay. So here's an artist rendering. If you look at this, there's Camelback. So this is a artist rendering of a Hohokam settlement of a Hohokam tribe right here where Phoenix was. And this is very, very, this is legitimate. This is what it would have looked like. And so you can see the canals. You can see how they're diverting the water from the Salt River, which we'll talk about. Must have been, it wasn't very lush, right? We can tell from archaeological records that this area was never very lush, but it probably had more rainfall than it does in the 2000s.
why is that?
Climate change, it happens, right?
Is that building?
We have some ruins of them, not that specific one. This is an artist rendering, but there are some ruins. So what would they use the water for? Whatever anyone else uses water for,
So cool.
right? For planting, for dyeing, for dyeing wool, like dyeing things, not for dyeing. Why did that happen?
Yes.
Oh yeah. And you have the nice shirt.
You look good, Miss Leitner.
Why did that turn on? I have no idea. It's not supposed to turn on when I have the, okay. So they were using the water just for all the same sort of things that we would use water for. Oops. Oh, this is excellent. There we go. And it stopped recording. Good. Good. Okay. Here's an old map. We're going to be looking at this again in a little bit. Here is South Mountain. Right. Here's modern day downtown Phoenix. Here's Camelback. And then this is the Papago Park. Okay. So we're right around here. Okay. So that's us right here, right now.
Which right where?
Right here. So downtown Phoenix, South Mountain.
Is that close to us?
I was gonna say.
Well, maybe we're like here. Here.
Well, we're
But
really-
here's the Rio Salado, or the Salt River. Right? So this is what we cross over, to go downtown 7th Street Central.
Yeah, that thing's dry.
Right? So that's dry. It didn't used to be, right? So it used to be a lot more. It used to have a lot more water in it, and then it did kind of slow down to a trickle, and then we diverted it, and now it's all in Tempe Lake.
Was it
Sorry, that's not Papago. That's whatever. Anyway,
Was it like still raining and stuff like years ago?
yeah, there would be dry seasons where.
2014?
Yeah, there would be dry seasons where it would dry up, but during the wet seasons, they would be able to use it and then store it and make these little reservoirs.
The dam at Tempe Marketplace, does that prevent the water from flowing down the Salt Lake?
Hmm. Down the Salt River, yeah. So there wouldn't be a lot, especially during the summer. It would still be dry, but that just kind of holds it and preserves it.
If we got rid of the dam, would it flood the whole thing, or would it just?
It would be a trickle. It would be pretty small. Again, especially during the hot seasons. But during the monsoons, it would have just like that whole area is probably going to be flooded during monsoons, if that dam wasn't there. Okay, that's what dams do. All right, so sorry, I'm going to go back a little bit. So agricultural settlements in Arizona. Sorry, I'm going to go back a little bit. I got distracted. All right, so we have the Anasazi. Those people were in the Four Corners region. We have the Mogollon, southern New Mexico, and then we have the Hohokam. That's mainly what we're going to be talking about today is the Hohokam because that's our area. The Hohokam, again, like I said, it's a Pima name for those who have vanished. Right? The Hohokam people died out. They vanished. Either died out or vanished. We don't know. Culture is divided into 4 developmental periods. We're going to look at a short video that shows some of that. There's the Pioneer, the Colonial, the Sedentary, and the Classic period. Basically, from between 1350 and 1450, they died out, or they moved, or they migrated, or something happened. We're just not quite sure. So basically, what we're looking at is this period about 1,500 years, from the time of Christ to about 1500 AD. Apache and Navajo, like I said, they come in about the 1200 time period. They're a little bit north, and they're going to be pretty distinct. Agricultural settlements, they would dig these irrigation canals sometimes 12 feet deep by hand using digging sticks. If you've ever tried to dig in Phoenix, you know it's pretty difficult. The dirt back then probably would have been a little bit easier, but still, it's pretty difficult.
How do you keep the water in the canal without the dirt absorbing all the water?
Over time, the bottom of the canal just kind of starts to form almost like a crust of mineral deposits and such, and so it keeps it from soaking in. But at first, yeah, it would just kind of start to soak in. But over time, it's going to kind of form its own kind of natural sort of concrete made out of like calcium and other minerals.
Oh, okay.
So it kind of creates its own little barrier.
Like those guys on YouTube that build like the houses out of dirt or something.
Yeah, right. Exactly the same sort of thing. The Salt River is the main source of water for the Hohokam people. And then they're bringing it into a network of smaller canals like we saw.
So they would drink the salt water?
Yeah, so it's not salt water, it just had a lot of minerals in it. The Spanish gave it the name the Salt River because it did have a lot of sediment in it and it did have a lot of minerals in it. And there is salt in the ground. Phoenix used to, tens of thousands of years ago, maybe hundreds of thousands of years ago, Phoenix used to be all under the sea, right? So the sea came in over Phoenix. And so that's why the groundwater is pretty salty. The ground itself has a lot of salt in it because it used to be over sea hundreds of thousands of years ago, maybe a million years ago or so.
Places where that didn't
I don't know. So these canals, 500 miles. They built 500 miles of canals. It irrigated up to 110,000 acres. And the food would have supported up to 80,000 people. Now, this is not 80,000 people in one settlement, right? We talked about how that city down in, we talked about how Teotihuacan is 120,000 people. They didn't have a city of 120,000 people. This is supporting people across a broader area of up to 80,000 people. So they were very, very, we don't have a lot of records. We wouldn't, and it's funny because the Spanish come in and they say, well, they're not civilized peoples. And according to Spanish customs, no, they're not, right? They don't have written language. They don't have, a well-defined culture. They don't have cities. They don't have streets. But in terms of irrigation and in terms of canals and in terms of supporting 80,000 people, they're very advanced people, right? So it's really cool to see, especially in a place like the Southwest. Okay, so again, 500 miles of canals. This is an old map showing where the Hohokam canals were. So all these dark lines, so this is the Salt River, and these dark lines are showing all of these canals that were built by the Hohokam, right? So it's pretty extensive. All right, so we're going to look at societal organization. We're going to look at a few different places. So just to show you on a map where we are. So we're looking at Montezuma Castle. So easy drive is about an hour and a half north. If you ever want to visit it, it's pretty cool. So this is Montezuma Castle. Ranging from about 1100 to 1400. This is when this settlement was taking place, about 1100 to 1400 AD. And if you look around, I don't have a good shot of it, but we're looking up at a canyon. It's a pretty short canyon. It's maybe 100 feet tall. But just to the back of you, if you're taking the picture, just to the back of you, there's a river there. And there's a lot of trees, and there's a little valley with water there. So this makes sense. This is why they would settle there, right? It's a good source of water. It's a good source of crops, of irrigation. Why build here? Why build in a cliff? Why take all the time and the effort to build a house in a cliff? It's safe. Yeah, it's safe. It's safe from animals. It's safe from other peoples. We don't have records of wars or of warring tribes of peoples, but that could have been a reason. Again, we're kind of putting together ideas as we know them, right? There's no written records. We have no written. This would be the same people, so the Hohokam people, right? So we're talking about various tribes within various peoples.
How do you get up there though?
Ladders. You pull them up at night.
What? You kidding me?
Mm-mm. And the Anasazi would do the same thing. There's cliffs all in southern Colorado as well that were done by the Anasazi a little bit later, and they're taking the same ideas from what the Hohokam are doing here. So you can see how it's kind of like an apartment, right? So it's multiple stories, and then you just have ladders moving from room to room.
So when multiple people live there?
Mm-hmm. Yep,
Like
multiple
more than
families.
one family?
Uh-huh.
Every day is like there.
That is really smart thinking.
We're going to go a little further north. So this is about where we were with Camp Verde, with Montezuma's Castle. And again, Montezuma's Castle, Montezuma didn't live there. Montezuma was down in Mexico. He was Aztec. Again, Spanish come in and go, oh, it's a castle. This is like Montezuma's Castle. The name stuck. Now we're going to go up to Walnut Canyon National Monument. Same sort of thing. This is very, very similar to what we were looking at before. A lot more trees, a lot more green because we're further north, right? We're up near Flagstaff. So higher elevation, we're looking at about 6,500 feet instead of about 2,000 feet. But same sort of thing. You have a place where you can do farming, where you can do irrigation. But then same sort of thing. This is not as well preserved, but we see remnants of homes. Again, it's kind of ready-made shelter. It's pretty easy to make. So instead of building something on the ground, you come up to the canyon. And obviously that path wasn't there. That was added later. Okay. So this is very similar to that initial video that you saw for up in Sedona, right? Most of these people are going to want to get off the ground, right? For safety. Maybe it's also for cooling effects, right? Instead of baking in the sun all day, right? Your house, now you can kind of get into the shade. The rocks are going to stay a little bit cooler. Next, we'll look at Betatacan and Keat Seal. This is up in the Navajo National Monument, so we're going further north now. So just over by the Grand Canyon. And again, there's all these different settlements in all of these different places. These are just the ones that we know about and the ones that are fairly interesting.
Kid is so
getting a little more arid again. This is built by the Anasazi people. But again, you see the same sort of things.
That's still there.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing been touched.
Mm-mm.
Nothing's been like restored.
It looks like a train.
Maybe it's been restored a bit, but
It looks tiny.
yeah.
Looks like,
Wait, wait, can you go back to the other picture? I couldn't
it
even
looks
see
like
that.
Oops.
Where is it? I couldn't even see that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So it's all down in here.
Oh, that's crazy. That's good camouflage.
It looks tiny.
Nice little.
Yeah. So this is a larger settlement.
That's super cool.
And then finally, we're going to go to Canyon de Chelly. So this is a French term. This was rediscovered by French explorers, so it's a French term. That's Chelly, not Chelly. But this is over here, just by the New Mexico border. Same sort of thing.
Whoa, that's
That rock is
super
so
cool.
Okay.
That cliff
What's
is
all in like this
crazy.
dark part?
Minerals, so it's water coming down and then just depositing minerals.
They had their own waterfall?
Yeah. When the rainy season comes, it just comes down the edge of the cliff. So we see some similarities with all of these, right? We see some similarities with all of these. They're always going to be in a canyon, not always, but a lot of them are going to be in a canyon. They're going to be nearby a water source. They're going to be nearby agriculture. Easy hunting, why? Because the animals are going to come down to the water. So this is your kind of little paradise, right? And then you move up at night, and that's where you are safe. Okay. Chaco Canyon. This one was a pretty large. This was a pretty large development. So we've gone further to the east, over here in modern-day New Mexico. 12,000 people lived in Chaco Canyon. This is more of what we would consider kind of a purpose-built. It wasn't kind of hanging on the edge of a cliff. This was built more on a flat surface. They created over 400 miles of roads that connected the town to other villages in the region.
Is that a
Mhm.
city? No, it's a-
It's sort of a city. It's 12,000 people.
Did any civilizations go into Grand Canyon?
Yeah.
Do we know?
There's still indigenous people that live in the base of the Grand Canyon that have been there for generations and generations.
Wait, but they're like not like.
Seriously?
Hmm?
So they don't know anything that's going on outside of the
No, they do. They absolutely do.
Oh,
But
so it's
but
not like
but they're descendants. It's like your aunt, right?
They got technology and stuff.
Oh yeah, it's just like Aunt MJ, right? Same sort of thing. It's they're card-carrying members of the tribe, and their generations and generations have lived there. Yeah.
The government can't kick
Yep.
them out.
Nope.
That's awesome.
Nope.
Really?
What, so do they have like normal houses or like their own
Huh?
little?
Hmm?
Wait, does that mean they have to like follow government, like our rules? Like.
Yeah.
They still do?
Taxes?
So they have their own most Native American towns. So like if you go into a reservation or a town or a nation, as they call it, they will have their own police force. They'll have their own laws. They'll have their own courts, etc. It's all self-contained. Now, if a native goes out and commits a crime or vice versa, then the sheriff is going to get involved, etc. And you still can't break federal laws, right? You can't like commit securities and exchange fraud, that kind of stuff, right? Feds are still you're still under the jurisdiction of the federal government, but less control over from like City of Phoenix can't go into a reservation. The Arizona troopers can't go into a reservation unless they're chasing someone in,
Yeah.
right? So there's jurisdiction.
Oh wow, that's cool. Whoa.
A little bit different that we've seen here in Chaco Canyon compared to others. We have these homes that were dug into the ground, again, likely to keep cool, yeah. And also, just for ease of construction, it's often easier to dig down than to build up, right? It's more secure, it's more stable, right? You don't have to worry about walls falling over. You can just build straight down and then just have a roof, right? So for those couple of reasons. So you can see the stairs going down, and then you'd have your house kind of ready-made.
Will there be like a wealthier class that would go down, or?
No, this would be for one family. And then you would also have another, maybe a larger one for ceremonial purposes. Maybe that's kind of your central meeting room, but that's a larger one, maybe as big as this classroom, for instance, right? So that is what, hello.
What a queen.
Thank you.
Rachel.
It's so exciting.
I told her last night. I was like, I actually told her, like, Rachel, do not forget the crutches.
I was cutting strawberries. Very boring.
Hey, bye.
Bye, Mary. Bye, Bear.
Thanks, Richie.
All right, as we move forward in time, we're going to see less and less permanent settlements. More and more of the people are going to be turning into nomadic cultures. So as we move into like the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, something changed. Something happened. We know that there was a pretty big flood around 1350 or so that kind of wiped out a lot of the Hohokam settlements. And then after that, things changed across the Southwest. We don't have a lot of records just because, in most other areas of the country, we have deciduous trees and old deciduous trees where we can kind of look at climate records through the tree rings. Here we don't. So we can't really tell. We don't know, climatologists don't really know what happened, but we know that something changed right around that time period where they think this area became much more arid pretty quickly. Within a period of like 20 to 30 years, all of a sudden the climate just totally shifted and things became much more arid, is their guess. And so what happens? Well, your river that you've lived by for generations starts to dry up. You got to move, right? You can't just start to irrigate or buy bottles of water. You got to move. And so these settlements become much more temporary. So we're going to see, especially the Navajos and the Apaches in the northern parts of these areas are going to be always nomadic. Remember, the Navajos and Apaches started up right around the 1200s. That's when they really come onto the scene. And they're never really going to build a lot of these, I don't want to say never, I'm not going to speak in these generalizations, but they're not as much going to build these really long-term settlements as the Hohokam and as the others did. So they're going to build these more temporary houses, these temporary huts. This is not original. This is a reconstruction of what a Navajo or an Apache house would have looked like. Again, you build it, you can build this in a day, right? You can literally take the door with you and build it somewhere else if you need to. So these people are going to become much more nomadic, just out of sheer necessity. Okay, so this is in northern Arizona.
Is that just sand over the whole thing?
I'm sorry?
Is that sand?
It's just clay. It's just built up mud.
That is really
So there's nothing on the inside
strange,
supporting all
but
that?
interesting.
Maybe it would be some stones or some sticks, maybe some stick supports. But it's, again, very, very temporary.
I like the door.
Okay.
Wait, what's that mountain behind there?
I don't know what that one's called. That's
Strange.
right on the edge of the Grand Canyon, I think.
It looks like Superstition Rock,
Yeah.
or like the thing in Utah, or whatever it's called.
All right, so we have on the back of the page, social and religious norms. Again, like I said, we don't have a lot of evidence of religious practices before around 1100, 1300 or so. But we have this drought that lasted from 1130 to 1180, decimated the Anasazi crops. And then we have this flood, 1358, completely wiped out the Hohokam irrigation system. So all of that work, 500 miles of canals that they've dug all around modern-day Phoenix, destroyed by a massive flood that happened in 1358. And we think they just left. We think they were like, forget it. It's not worth it. We'll just leave, and we'll just go and join up with other tribes. That's what we think might have happened. At least that's our best guess. When this happened, right around the same time period, we start to see evidence of a lot more religious ceremonies and religious ceremonial practices. We think, again, what happens when disaster strikes? We still do it today. When you're having a really bad day, please God help me, right? We think the same sort of thing happened. All of a sudden, their life is turned upside down, and now they're going to start to turn towards spirituality.
Can you go inside that?
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
It's called a kiva. So this is called a kiva. This is a ceremonial place, right? So this would be sort of a place where a priest or the head of the tribe would go, the chief would go and offer up sacrifices or incense or things like that to the gods. Or to the god, or to a god,
How do you
right?
even, like, get in there? Like, dig, you know, like,
I'm sorry?
how do you, like, carve into a mountain, whatever they're doing?
A lot of sticks and a lot of time. They'd use rocks, right? So they would carve rocks into kind of axes, into kind of picks, and then they would use sharpened stones that then they harden over a fire, and it would turn it pretty strong. So you could use a hardened stick as kind of like a shovel. And so they would reinforce the insides of these, and this is called a kiva. Sometimes these kivas would be used for meeting centers, but oftentimes they're used for spiritual practices as well. What does their life look like? What does the culture look like? Well, the extended family is all going to live. They're all going to work together. Male and female are going to be participating in the agricultural process. But it is really the women who are going to be dominating the life, right? Most Native American cultures, especially in North America, are female dominated. Right? So the woman is the head of the house, especially the oldest woman of the house, so the grandmother or the great-grandmother. She is the elder, and whatever she says goes, right, of that community. It's even still the case in my brother-in-law's extended family, right? The men have very little say in what happens in tribal business. It's all of the women who make a lot of the decisions.
So, like,
It's the way that they started. In a sense, it does make sense because the men are going to be off hunting, right? They're going to be off hunting, they're going to be off gathering. And so the women are going to be at home for days on end. And so they're going to be managing the home front, right? And multiple families are all going to be working together. So it's all going to be a group of women working together for the security of, hey, let's build this here, let's do this here. The men are gone, right? It's kind of like what happened with us in World War II, right? All the men are gone. What happens? Women flood the workforce. Women start to take control over things, right? But this was the case over millennia, over many, many generations. And so still today, that's the culture in a lot of these, in a lot of Native American cultures, right? We have women would raise children and perform household tasks, while male heads of households would participate in an informal council to make community or band decisions. But again, most of the time, it's going to be the women who are making those decisions as well. Okay? All right, so let's look at some artifacts. Not a lot. Again, there's not a lot. We see a lot of tools. We don't see a lot of art. One of the first things that we're going to see is baskets and basket weaving. Yeah.
Sorry, there's a museum, I don't know if it's free, but I know the admission is really cheap, in Mesa that has like a ton of baskets and
Yep.
a ton of like artifacts.
Yeah. So this was how you would transport almost everything, right, was baskets. Stone carving just didn't exist, right? It takes too much time, especially later on when these people are going to be very nomadic. They're going to just be building these baskets. They're lightweight, they're portable, it's easy to carry stuff in it. And in fact, they got so good at building these baskets and at weaving these baskets,
oh my gosh,
you would, again, just take reeds,
that's so pretty.
and then just weave it together. They got so good at building these baskets that they were in fact waterproof, right? There's nothing on the outside of them, there's nothing on the inside of them, there's no like pitch, there's no clay or anything like that. It's just that's how tightly they were woven. They were actually waterproof. So extraordinarily good at making these baskets. This just kind of gives you an idea of how it's done, right? You can see all these little reeds, and then they're just basically taking a needle and sewing it shut, right? So that's how you make those baskets.
Do they still, like, in the reservations, do they still, like, teach them how to weave?
Absolutely, yep.
So, like, does your sister-in-law know how to weave?
No, they don't do that so much. That's more of a Southwest thing.
Oh, okay.
Were they the ones like carrying on the heads that these people?
Pottery is going to arrive much later. Only about 1,000 years ago do we start to see some pottery. This is right around this time period, right around 1000 AD, we start to see a lot of influence from Mesoamerican cultures. So Mesoamerican peoples around the year 1000 start to come into the Southwest, and they start to influence. How do we know that? Just from the baskets, from the pottery. We see a lot of the same designs that we're going to see in Mesoamerican cultures. We're going to see those same sort of designs in the Southwest cultures.
Is that because of trade?
Trade and also just immigration, right? People are going to be moving in from Mesoamerica. So very early on, peoples are going to be coming down into Mesoamerica, and then later on, they're going to come back up. And then there's going to be some increased trade, and there's going to be increased sharing of knowledge. And so we think it was with the Mesoamerican kind of influx right around the year 1000 that we start to see some of this pottery. Before then, it was mostly baskets. And obviously, baskets aren't going to be surviving anyway because they're going to disintegrate pretty quickly, even though it's a dry climate. The pottery that we see, there's a lot of movement, a lot of what we would call circulation. So we're going to see Mogollon vessels in Anasazi places. We're going to see Hohokam vessels in Anasazi places, etc. So we're going to see a lot of the circulation among various peoples. So there were definitely conflicts. There were definitely tiffs between these various tribes, but there was also a lot of trade and cultural advancement between them. Okay, so that's just your very rough, broad outline of the Southwest cultures. How did Phoenix come to be? Right. So I always kind of like to end this class with, all right, we've seen where it was. We see what happened. The Hohokam disappear around 1358, and then there's the Anasazi. There's other peoples. There's the Hopi next to the Grand Canyon or in the Grand Canyon. But what happened in Phoenix? Well, it's because of the Hohokam. It's because of the canals, some of them that still did exist, that we have Phoenix today. It's because of those canals that they built over hundreds of years that Phoenix is where it is. We have the Salt River Valley. There were no permanent settlements around it during the 400 years or so between when the Hohokam abandoned in 1358 to about the mid-1700s or late 1700s. There's no permanent settlements here. Phoenix didn't exist. But around 1860, there was a gold rush in the area, right? So you ever go to Goldfield, right, mine over there by the Superstition Mountains, right? Gold mines are starting to crop up all over the place. And we have a prospector. His name is Jack Swilling. He's an ex-Confederate soldier, and he was a prospector. And he was a smart guy, and he realizes, well, maybe instead of going for gold, I'm going to figure out water. Smart man, because that's more valuable than gold, right? Especially in the Southwest. So he's looking at all these abandoned Hohokam canals, and he starts the Swilling Irrigation and Canal Company in 1867. And he's basically working on infrastructure to take the Salt River that was still flowing, although not as much these days, and he's starting to divert it into these canals. He's starting to use this, and he's starting to irrigate crops, and now he has land that he can sell. Now it's irrigable. Now it's land that you can, plant crops in. Instead of it just being arid and dry, now it's fertile. And so he's selling miners this land. By 1868, 16 partners had harvested their first crops within the first year, and then that year, a small settlement named Phoenix develops, right? So it's because of water, and it's because of the Hohokam people, right? Because of those canals that were already there, they were left abandoned. They weren't working anymore. All he did was kind of reconnect them. Obviously, I'm making it sound a lot simpler than it was. It took years. It took 4 or 5 years for him to take all the infrastructure and the people to do it. But he was a successful guy. He had an army pension. He had some savings, and he was able to kind of reestablish these canals back to where they were. So we're going to look at this video real quickly. And this is going to kind of just do an overview of what we've already talked about.
It's true that our technology has allowed us to build incredible things, but when you consider what people before industrial society dominated everything we do, they also accomplished great things. And the Hohokam irrigation system is one of those. People come from all over the world to study the Hohokam irrigation system because from an engineering perspective, it's absolutely remarkable. I often call the Hohokam people who designed and built the canals engineers, and people say, well, they didn't have engineers, and I say, oh yes, they did. They designed a system to move water, they surveyed the land, they learned how to properly manage the water and to rebuild things when they broke because of floods or other problems that they encounter. And that's engineering, It is the same process, and it's science, because they have a problem, they calculate a solution, they test the solutions to see if they work, they modify the solutions to make them work better, and that is a form of science.
That wasn't the video I thought it was, but whatever. It's still nice. Okay. So I'd like to show you a set of 4 maps. So this is what we've been looking at, right? This is the existing Salt River. And where does the Salt River come from, right? It comes from all the snow melt up in the superstitions, right? All down here. And then during the rainy season, it fills up again, but mostly it's from snow melt, right? Over the springtime, it just feeds this area. If you look at the current canal system that we're starting to overlay here on the existing city of Phoenix, these big blue lines. These are the main canals that we have today that have been added. But
They added or they just used part of the.
yeah, so they used a lot of it. And it doesn't even show, these thick blue lines don't even show all the other little canals. A lot of them actually still follow the exact same lines of the Hohokam people. Why? Well, because it made sense, right? The Hohokam people figured out Phoenix is pretty flat. In the valley itself, Phoenix is pretty flat, but the Hohokam people are going to take advantage of the natural curvature and the natural, elevation of some of the plains. So you can see how the irrigation maps are all still following those same, and as we kind of zoom out more and more, these same canals are still there. So modern day Phoenix really owes its existence to the engineering and the irrigation of these people who existed 1,000 years ago. Because why rebuild it? It already works. Okay. All right. That's Southwest. Next week we'll start to dive into medieval.